Hello, Sue Iannucci here from the Waterman Bird Club here in Dutchess County, New York. And today I'm going to talk about bird adaptations. So first things first, what do we mean by adaptations? These are just changes in structure or functions in the bird that have evolved through natural selection to make it better suited to survive and multiply in its environment. So what makes a bird a bird? Well, here's a bird. How is it different from you and me? If we were live, hopefully someone would be out pointing out that it has wings and that it's flying. So birds are warm-blooded vertebrates in the class Aves. They have bodies covered in feathers, wings, a beak with no teeth, scaly legs, and their young are hatched from hard-shelled eggs externally. They also have a unique respiratory system, a highly efficient digestive system, and hollow bones. So let's look at some of these bird adaptations. First of all, flight. Why fly? Well, it's a good way to evade predators and reach patchy food sources, and it allows birds to follow changes in season and follow new food sources. So wings allow flight, but the trade-off is not having any hands. So they have to do more things with their beaks and feet. The next 5 items have to do with reducing their weight in order to make flight possible. So it would be hard to fly if you were carrying babies around in your body. So birds lay eggs and then sit on them or incubate them until they hatch. Bones give us structure and allow us to stand up so we don't look like jellyfish or amoebas, but they're heavy. So bird bones, on the other hand, are hollow and filled with air spaces and just have struts inside for support. Teeth, like bones, are heavy. So birds do without any jawbone or teeth, and they simply swallow their food whole. And because of this, they need to have an efficient digestive system to process this food, extract the nutrients, and get rid of the waste quickly. So picture one of those big snakes that eats a whole animal and then lays there for weeks digesting it. That's why snakes don't fly, or one of the reasons. In birds, food is broken up in the gizzard, which we'll talk about a little later. And bird poop is not toxic like our pee, so they don't need to drink a lot of water, which is also heavy, to flush the excess nitrogen from their bodies. Birds have a compact, centralized body without heavy arms and legs to weigh them down, and their weight is centered over their feet, so they can walk and perch without losing their balance. Of course, there's always exceptions, and we'll look at some of those a little later. So birds need to be good at aerobics in order to fly, especially those that migrate long distances between their breeding and wintering grounds. So their lungs are much more efficient than ours, and their hearts are much larger than ours relative to their overall body size. So wings are a very important thing for flying, and just as you and I may look very different from each other, birds come in many shapes and sizes too. And one feature that makes them different is the shape of their wings. So the shape of the wing helps determine their flying style. We look at the grouse here at the top. It has relatively small wings for its weight, and they're very short and broad. So this bird needs to flap and fly really fast if it wants to stay airborne. It's not very good at gliding. A hawk, you can see, has relatively larger wings compared to the body, and they're longer and narrower, so this bird can fly a little more slowly and flap less frequently. And at the bottom we have an albatross who has a relatively small wing area, and they're very long, narrow wings. So this bird needs high speed to remain airborne, but it can glide very efficiently in windy places like the open ocean where it lives. Feathers are another adaptation unique to birds. They play a critical role in temperature control and in flight, and they come in many different color patterns for display and camouflage. So a small bird like this hummingbird has maybe fewer than 1,000 feathers, whereas a large bird like a swan may have over 25,000 feathers. Okay, I have a raven feather here. It's probably hard to see on the little screen. Note that you need a federal permit if you want to collect any part of a bird or their nests. So I do have one from the Bird Club. But if you've ever played with a bird feather that you found on the ground, you notice that you can kind of separate it out and it splits apart. But then if you play with it a little bit, you can smooth it out and it all goes back together again, nice and smooth. Those are interlocking barbules that make the feather aerodynamic. Down at the bottom here, you'll see fluffier ones. This is down that we'll talk about later. So feathers are made of keratin, like our fingernails, and they need daily maintenance to keep them clean and properly aligned and free of parasites. And preening is a bird's way of grooming its feathers to keep them in tip-top condition. So while preening, they remove the dust and dirt and parasites, and they put the feathers in proper alignment, smoothing out those barbules. Birds have a preen gland near the base of the tail that produces an oily, waxy substance that helps waterproof feathers and keeps them flexible. So while preening, birds spread this oil to each feather so they are evenly coated and protected. Some birds like owls, hawks, and herons have specialized feathers that actually disintegrate into a powdery down, which serves the same purpose as the preen oil. Other methods of feather maintenance include bathing, like the bluebird in the lower left, or dust baths, which the sparrows are doing in the upper corner. Anting, where a bird will open its wings and actually let ants crawl around in the feathers. I think there's some sort of acid in ant bodies that inhibits parasites. And sunning. So sunning might make the preen oil actually easier to spread and also redistribute the parasites so they can pick them off. All right, there's different kinds of feathers. Wing and tail feathers are the flight feathers. They have those interlocking barbules, which make the air flow over the feather smoothly, reducing drag. And this shows a pileated woodpecker in flight. The up flap, the down flap, and the glide. Excuse me. No, some flightless birds like the ostrich do not have those interlocking barbules, and that's why they look so fluffy. Tail feathers are flight feathers that allow birds to change direction and control their speed when flying. So a Cooper's hawk, shown on the upper left there, eats other birds, and it needs speed and maneuverability when chasing its dinner through the trees. A woodpecker, like the downy woodpecker on the right there, has a very stiff tail feathers, and they use those to prop themselves up on the tree while they're hammering away with their beaks. Other birds have tails mainly for display purposes. For example, the peacock shown there. Well, actually, it's just the peacock tail. The peacock was hiding in the bush, and pheasants. So contour feathers line the body of the bird. And they waterproof, insulate, and streamline the body during flight or during swimming. So note how these gull feathers appear very smooth and tight, not allowing any water to penetrate to the skin. The raptor, on the other hand, the contour feathers feel a little more loose, and the songbird falls somewhere in between. Okay, underneath the contour feathers is down. So down feathers have no interlocking barbules. They're fluffy in order to trap air and keep the bird warm, just like your down-filled coat or the toasty comforter on your bed. It's hard to see the down on adult birds, so the easiest example of down can be seen on these baby ducklings and geese, which hatch out of the egg with a down covering. Bristles are long, stiff feathers near the mouth of a bird. It's common in insect catchers and woodpeckers. They're not entirely sure of the function. They might help protect the eyes and the face, but they also give the bird more sensitivity around the mouth. Removing the bristles does not appear to prevent them from catching bugs, though I feel sorry for the birds that they did this experiment on. So feathers are great for flying and keeping warm and dry, but face it, sometimes you just want to look good. So many birds attract mates with bright colors and fancy feathers. Remember that peacock tail? Well, many male birds develop what we call breeding plumage, and that's more colorful than the basic plumage that they sport the rest of the year. It takes a lot of energy to produce these bright colors, so they only go all out during the most important time when they need to attract a lady friend. So whereas many male birds tend to be bright and showy, most female birds are much duller. And one reason is they often spend more time sitting on the nest, incubating eggs, so they want to blend in and not be seen. Another reason is that the females are putting their energy into producing those eggs rather than flashy feathers. So here we have some examples of male, female on the left, and male pairs of the same species showing the color differences. The finches look similar, but the male has red. On something like this black-throated blue warbler, basically the only thing they have in common is the little white wing patch here, their pocket handkerchief, we call it. And here's a female grosbeak and a male grosbeak, but you can still tell she's a grosbeak by looking at that schnoz. As far as ducks go, female ducks are mostly brown, so sometimes it's hard to identify them unless there happens to be a colorful male nearby with more distinct markings, like this wood duck male below. Some birds are just brown and streaky in order to blend in with their surroundings. So birders sometimes refer to LBJs, that stands for little brown jobbies. Birds like sparrows and hermit thrushes spend much of their time on the ground scratching for bugs. So both sexes are brown and blend in with the dirt and leaves. If we look at the brown creeper on the right here, who spends his time climbing up tree trunks in search of bugs, you see that his feathers blend in well with the bark. And then there's the owls, who mainly hunt at night, so they need to blend in during the trees during the day when they're resting. There's a little screech owl sleeping in this tree crack. Okay, feathers are not permanent. Birds need to replace worn feathers through a process called molt. So some birds do a complete molt all at once, like ducks do in the summer after breeding. Others will do a partial molt, which takes weeks or months to complete. So you can see this turkey vulture on the right here is in the process of gradually replacing its wing feathers. Most birds molt in late summer or early fall into what we call basic plumage. Some others have another spring molt into breeding plumage. And we could see this in our American goldfinch. This is the bird we see in the winter time in the upper left. And then in the spring, he replaces his head and body feathers with the bright yellow and the black cap. The spring molt is often only a partial molt of the head and body to get the bright colors to attract a mate, but not necessarily their flight feathers. A bird like a starling, shown in the middle here, only molts once each year, and that's after breeding. Their new feathers are pale tipped, which gives them this speckled appearance, or the stars, but these pale tips that we see in fall and winter wear off by spring, and then in summer, and when the breeding season comes, they're a glossy black bird rather than speckled. So they don't actually molt into their breeding plumage, they acquire it through their feathers wearing down. Black feathers in general have more melanin in them, which makes them stronger and more durable than the paler feathers. So this is why you'll see many gull species and other primarily white birds that have black wingtips. And that's because the wingtips get the most wear and tear and need to be stronger. All right, this dapper blue jay on the left here turns quite grumpy when he molts, and sometimes you'll see bald blue jays in the fall. They're not sick, they're just growing new feathers. Nestlings and juvenile birds have different molts as they grow into adults. So it takes a bird like a bald eagle here 4 years to acquire its white and white tail and head here. So the first 4 years, they look brown with various patches of white streaks in them. And at the bottom, this sequence shows the eastern bluebird, various plumages. This is a fledgling on the left and that kind of scruffy looking juvenile who's just starting to get the orange breast feathers. And on the right, we have the male in all his glory. So it takes a lot of energy to molt and produce new feathers. And birds need to balance the timing of their energy intensive activities like breeding, raising young, molting, and migration. So many birds will molt after they're done breeding and raise their chicks, but before they set out on a long migration. And others will fatten up and migrate first and then wait until they arrive on their wintering grounds to molt. Okay, moving on to feet, bills, and digestion. Since birds have no hands, many of the routine functions of feeding and personal hygiene must be done with feet and bills. And the bird's digestive tract does a lot of the work that our teeth do for us. Starting with feet, birds have feet like us, but they're walking around on their tippy toes all the time. That first joint that looks kind of like a backwards bending knee to us is actually the bird's ankle. And the knee is hidden up in the feathers. Most birds have 4 toes, but their toes are arranged differently on different types of birds. Of course, there's always exceptions. An emu has 3 toes. Ostriches only have 2 toes. So perching birds typically have 3 forward-facing toes, like this goldfinch, and 1 rear-facing toe. That's called anisodactyl. And when a bird lands, the ankle joint bends, which stretches the tendon and pulls on the toes, causing them to curl around the branch. So there's no muscles involved. It's all automatic. And then when they take off, the tendon straightens and relaxes the grip of the toes. So this is why birds don't fall out of trees when they sleep and how they stay put on a windy day. And it also allows them to hang on upside down while they're foraging for insects. So birds like woodpeckers, owls, and ospreys have what we call a zygodactyl toe arrangement. There's your word of the day, zygodactyl. 2 forward-facing toes and 2 rear-facing toes. So this formation allows them to get a better grip on things. So the woodpeckers need it for clinging to vertical tree trunks, and the owls and ospreys need a good grip to hold on to their wriggling prey. An osprey's diet consists almost exclusively of fish, so they actually have spiked scales on the bottom of their feet to help them grip those slippery fish. And you'll often see them carrying fish that look almost as big as they are. Many hawks and eagles use their sharp talons to catch and kill their prey. Others, like the Cooper's hawk here, will catch the prey with their talons and use their strong feet to squeeze the bird to death. Some small raptors, like falcons, will catch their prey in the talons, but use their beak to kill it. And then there's the swimmers. Birds that spend a lot of time in the water have either webbed feet, which is also called palmation, or lobed toes to help them swim or walk on loose surfaces like soft sand and floating vegetation. So birds like this baby horned grebe on the left here and coots have what we call lobed toes. And this is actually the bird's foot stretched out behind it here, and you could see that big fat toe. Ducks, geese, loons, and gulls have webbed feet like this gull here. You could see the webbing between his toes. And some shorebirds have what we call semi-palmated feet, where the webbing would only extend halfway across the toes. Okay, in addition to their unique feet, leg positioning is also important for some swimming birds. Ducks come in several categories. The dabbling ducks tend to paddle along the surface of the water, foraging for insects and plant material in shallow water, but they're just as likely to be found walking on the land and foraging in the grass. Geese and swans also fall into this dabbler category. So you can see their legs are located in the center of their body, balancing their weight so they can walk as well as they swim. And you see when they're looking for something underwater that you tend to see the butt sticking up in the air. They are able to dive. I've seen a duck diving for crayfish, but they're usually stay along the surface. Diving ducks and sea ducks, though, specialize in catching fish and shellfish. So their legs are positioned at the very rear end of their bodies, making them very efficient divers, but very awkward on land. And excuse me, grebes and loons have similar leg placement. So many of these diving birds are found in deeper water and they're often difficult to photograph. So it's kind of hard to show you, but you can kind of see here this eared grebe under the water. His legs are coming out way back here. This is a horned grebe just diving. This is what most of my grebe pictures look like. I never quite get the whole grebe. It's just the rear end going in, but this is the tail end, and here's his leg coming right out the back of his body. And the baby grebes, which are shown up here in the upper right, are born and they can swim almost as soon as they hatch, but they're very awkward on land like their parents. So to keep them safe, the parents keep them close by carrying them around on their backs until they learn to swim or dive and fish for themselves. They can swim just fine on their own. Okay, the waders. Birds like herons and egrets have long legs and long toes to help them keep their balance while wading and fishing in shallow water, often on that loose vegetation. The great blue heron shown on the left here also has a serrated talon for preening those long flowing feathers. The photo in the lower right shows the long toes of a black-crowned night heron. And the upper right shows the yellow feet of a snowy egret. So I wonder if he dangles his toes in the water, like the fish might mistake that for a worm or something and come a little closer to investigate. And at the other end of the spectrum are the tiny hummingbird feet. They're very small anisodactyl toes, but still functional, allowing them to perch and perhaps scratch an itch if it's just in the right place. Okay, bills. Everything we do with our hands, a bird must do with either its feet or its bill. So in the breeding season, you'll see birds carrying nesting materials in their bill. The pigeon here will throw a few sticks on the ledge and call that a nest. Birds like the finches and the Carolina wren here are collecting bunches of grass to make their little cup nests. It's always fun to watch the house wrens maneuver these big long sticks that are twice as long as them into the little hole of the bluebird house. They fill the whole thing up with sticks and make their nest at the bottom. And over here's the Baltimore oriole, who's a master basket weaver and weaves this basket of grass that hangs from a branch. Okay, during the breeding season, you'll also see birds carrying food for their young. And if you're lucky enough to see them take the food into a nest, you'll often see them return with a little white fecal sack. And this is the baby's dirty diaper, which they dispose of somewhere away from the nest so as not to alert predators to the whereabouts of their babies. So many baby birds are fed insects and caterpillars, but as adults, their diets change. And we can tell a lot about what a bird eats just by looking at the shape of its bill. First, we have the seed crackers. Birds like grosbeaks, cardinals, and finches have really hefty bills that allow them to easily crack open hulls to get to the seeds inside. They're able to just crush the shell with their beak and grab the seed with their tongue while letting the shell fall to the ground. Birds with smaller bills will eat seeds too, but they need to carry the seed to a tree branch and either wedge it into the bark to peck at it or hold it between their toes like this tufted titmouse is doing. Note that these birds are not exclusively seed eaters. They also eat bugs and berries or whatever they can find. Often bird diets tend to change with the seasons and what food is available. And here we have the stabbers. Birds like herons and egrets stand quietly in shallow water waiting for a fish to come by, then plunge their head and neck down to either spear it with their dagger-like bill or grab it in their strong jaws. So I saw this great egret here. The tip of his bill here is actually poking right out the other side of the fish. I did not see how he got it off of his bill to be able to swallow it. And then there's the filterers. These northern shovelers are in the dabbling duck category, and they have fringes on the sides of their tongue to filter food from the water. Skimmers, these black skimmers, the lower mandible of their bill is actually longer than the upper mandible, so they fly low over the water, kind of dipping the bill in the water to skim small fish from the surface of the ocean. And woodpeckers, like their name suggests, have sharp, powerful bills for drilling into trees. Some drilling is to create nest cavities, but a lot of it is for drilling for insects in those dead trees. Their chisel-like bills can hammer at the rate of 16 times per second. That's like twice the speed of a machine gun, meaning their head is traveling twice the speed of a moving bullet. So they have special muscles that pull the brain case away from the beak, and the area between the beak and the skull is separated by a spongy, shock-absorbing type of cartilage. They also have a long barbed tongue, which you can kind of see sticking out here on this pileated woodpecker, and sticky saliva to pull bugs out of the cracks. And this northern flicker in the bottom is actually using its long bill to probe for ants in the cracks of my rotting deck. So in addition to insects and spiders, the yellow-bellied sapsucker eats tree sap, and it returns later to the same tree to eat the insects that get trapped in the sap. So you can tell a sapsucker is in the area if you see these neat rows of holes shown in the tree on the right here. Nectar sippers are the hummingbirds. They have specialized bills and long tongues for sipping nectar from flowers or the sugar water from your feeder. Hummingbirds are unique to the Americas, and many species of hummingbirds have evolved bills for feeding on specific types of flowers. And then we have the insect eaters. Gnatcatchers, flycatchers, peewees, and swallows all have very small bills for eating insects. So swallows and chimney swifts spend much of their time in the air catching bugs on the fly, whereas phoebes and peewees will tend to perch on a branch and sally forth to grab an insect and then return to their perch to watch for another bug. Warblers and vireos are also small-billed insect eaters. And then we have the raptors. So birds of prey all have sharp hooked bills designed for tearing food apart. So from the small sharp-shinned hawk shown on the lower left here, who's only about the size of a blue jay, to the larger red-tailed hawk in the middle here and the much larger bald eagle on the right, note that they all have a similar shape with this little hook on the end of their beak for ripping apart flesh. Even this juvenile barred owl has a formidable looking hooked beak. And then we have the probers. Many shorebirds have long, thin bills for probing in the sand in search of crabs, mollusks, worms, and insects that burrow in the damp soil. Some of them are skinny. Others, like the oyster catchers, are a little heftier. They're able to put their bill into a partially opened oyster shell and actually pluck the animal out of the shell. And other shorebirds like the peeps here, like this baby piping plover, have very small bills, but they also probe the sand for insects and larvae, just not quite as deep as the others. And we can't talk about bills without showing the latest Dutchess County celebrity, the Roseate Spoonbill, who showed up in the pond last July up in Poughkeepsie. This bird uses its spoon-like bill to scoop up minnows, insects, and bits of plants from the shallow water. All right, moving on to digestion. The bird digestion is efficient and fast because you cannot fly if you have a lead belly. So most of the food is broken up in the gizzard, which is the muscular part of a bird's stomach. It does a lot of the work that we humans do with our molars. So when a bird swallows food, it enters the esophagus. And then some birds have a little pouch on the side called the crop, where they can store food until they pass it on to the stomach. So you may have seen a mourning dove scarfing up a bunch of seeds at your feeder until its neck bulges while it's filling its crop. And all birds have a two-part stomach. So the first part, called the proventriculus here, is like our stomach. It's where the digestive enzymes are secreted to start the digestive process. And the second part, which we do not have, is called the gizzard. So birds that eat hard foods like seeds, nuts, shellfish, or rodents with bones in them have very thick-walled and muscular gizzards. Nectar sifters and soft insect or fruit eaters still have a gizzard, but it's much thinner. Birds with thick gizzards will pick up grit like little stones, sand, or small seashells. And this grit helps pulverize the food when the gizzard muscles get to work. So birds like an owl swallow small prey food whole. And after all the digestible food is liquefied and passed on to their intestines, the bird coughs up the non-digestible parts, mainly the bones, teeth, and fur or feathers, as a pellet. So the digestive process in a bird is relatively fast. A duck, for example, takes about 45 minutes to pass a shellfish through its system, and it only takes maybe 30 minutes for a berry eater to process a meal. Bones and muscles, bird bones, as we mentioned, are hollow with air sacs and struts, kind of like a roller coaster or railroad trestle shown here. This makes them lighter weight for flying. Some of their bones are fused together in order to endure the stress that flying puts on them, namely the wrist bones, the pelvis, and the thorax or wishbone. Birds also have a lot more vertebrae in their necks than we do. That flexibility is important for preening because remember, birds don't have hands, so they have to be able to reach all those feathers with their beak, except for the head feathers, which are reached with the feet. And the neck flexibility also allows them to turn their heads easily to keep a lookout, so they can turn their heads 180 degrees to look behind them. As far as muscles go, flight muscles account for up to a fourth of a bird's body mass. A tiny hummingbird will flap its wings more than 50 times per second. Even a chickadee flaps about 27 times per second. And many large birds do more gliding, so they don't need to flap as much, but flight takes muscles. So birds have a high core body temperature. They run hot around 104 to 111 degrees. And they have this high body temperature allows the nerve impulses to move faster through their body, which improves their muscle strength. So high body temperatures require a high level of energy expenditure. So birds have a very high metabolism rate. Songbirds have the highest resting rate of all vertebrates. And that resting rate increases 2 to 4 times during typical activities like foraging, but it will increase 10 times or more when they're flying. So this seems like an awful lot of energy to invest, but bird flight is actually very economical. A songbird flying A kilometer, for example, will use less than 1% of the energy that a mouse would use to run the same distance. So how do birds keep going? Well, they have super efficient respiratory and circulatory systems. They have a unique respiratory system with a series of air sacs connected to the lungs. So unlike the branches in our lungs, where the air flows out the same path that it comes in, birds have looping air passages, which allow a more efficient one-way airflow through the body. The four-chamber heart is similar to a mammal's heart, but birds can more fully drain the ventricles and increase the blood flow. So the strongest flyers, the deepest divers, and the birds that live at high altitudes or in cold climates have the greatest need to get oxygen and nutrients to their organs and muscles. So they have the largest hearts and lungs. But the downside to these adaptations, there's always a downside, right, is that they also have high blood pressure. But the upside is this high core temperature allows birds to forage early in the morning and late in the day, which probably gives them an advantage over cold-blooded prey and other potential competitors for that prey. But a byproduct of metabolism is heat. So if birds are so hot to begin with, then how do they keep cool when the air temperatures rise? Well, they can take baths or go swimming, like these catbirds and bluebirds on the right. Then they fluff out their feathers and catch some breeze. Or you may also see them panting like this blue jay on the left. They can control the blood flowing to their legs and bills in order to regulate their temperature. Or they might just hang out in the shade. And if shade is not an option, you might see parents spreading their wings like an umbrella over their chicks to shade them from the sun. But this probably also helps cool the parent, as herons have been seen doing this even without chicks to care for. And on the other side of the coin is cold management. How do birds keep warm in winter? Well, first off, they're covered with all those feathers and down that we talked about earlier, which is what your winter coats and sleeping bags are stuffed with. All birds stay warm by trapping pockets of air around their bodies. So notice the puffed up junco in the snow here, a little round thing. This is what makes our tiny little summer goldfinches look like tennis balls in the winter. The secret to maintaining these layers of air lies in having clean, dry, and flexible feathers. So that cleaning process, preening, which we talked about earlier, helps the birds keep a water-resistant outer layer and a toasty, warm inner layer. But what about their legs and feet? You suppose all these gulls here and this duck are all amputees? No. Birds lose heat through their legs and feet, which are not covered in feathers. So they're actually cutting their heat loss in half by tucking one leg up into the feathers. And notice that the gulls are also tucking their beaks into their back feathers. That photo was taken in January on the beach in Connecticut, so it was a pretty cold day. The birds can control the flow of blood through their legs and feet, kind of isolating the blood that flows through them, not circulating it through the rest of the body. And this reduces the heat loss by almost 90% in their extremities. So this is how they can stand on snow and ice. Other cold management strategies include huddling together at night for warmth. They may snuggle alone or in a tree cavity or in a nest box. Some birds even go into a state of torpor when it gets really cold to conserve energy. All right, moving on to senses. Birds have keen vision. It's the dominant sense, and on average, birds see 2 to 3 times more sharply than people. Some, like the peregrine falcon, are able to see a small target from over a mile away. There's a great program on this, on the NOVA program. I think you could Google it. It's the world's fastest animal, I think it's called. Even the small songbirds need terrific eyesight to be able to see a bug on the ground from their perch in the tree branch. And bird eyes are so large relative to the size of their skull that there's actually no room to rotate them in the sockets. So this is why they need those flexible necks so they can turn their heads to align their field of view. So you may think that this Cooper's hawk eye doesn't look all that big in the head, but remember that most of this is all feathers and the skull is not all that big. Birds can see colors. It's important for daytime predators to be able to distinguish their prey from the background. It's also important at mating and nesting times because males put a lot of energy into growing that breeding plumage to impress the ladies. Baby birds often have brightly colored gapes around the edges of their mouth here, which makes it easier for the parents to see where to put the food, especially if their nest is in a dark tree cavity. And birds also have another set of cones in their eyes that we don't have that allow them to see ultraviolet light. So some plumages look different in ultraviolet light. Which means birds probably see each other differently than we see them. And the other cool thing about UV light from a raptor's perspective is that mice and voles use urine to scent mark their trails, and urine absorbs UV light. So falcons can actually see that reflected UV light. And a kestrel up in the air will see a mouse trail as a little black line through the field, making it a little bit easier to locate some prey. And of course, there's always the exception, and owls are the exception here. They're mainly nocturnal hunters, so they don't need to see color. Instead, they have more rods, which are the light detecting cells, as opposed to more cones. And they primarily hunt by sound. They don't need to see their prey, but they do need to see where they're going. Hearing. Birds don't have external ears like us, but they do have ear openings and special feathers called ear coverts. These protect the openings and have little resistance to sound. So I put up this finch here because his ear coverts are a different color. They're the brown area here right behind the eye. So the shape of the ear passage and the ear coverts help funnel the sound to the bird's inner ear. As a group, birds hear a wider range of sound than humans, but each species tends to have a specialized hearing range. So warblers sing in a very high range, often inaudible to some older people. Woodpeckers can hear grubs below the bark of trees. Robins can hear worms in the ground, and pigeons can even hear the low frequency rumbles that often precede earthquakes. Unfortunately, they only hear it about 3 seconds before it happens, so it's not useful for predicting them. Birds are especially sensitive to pitch, tone, and rhythm changes, and they use those variations to recognize other individual birds, even in a noisy flock. So think about the emperor penguin who goes away to the ocean to fish, comes back and has to find its chick amongst the mass of noisy birds. Somehow they do it. Nocturnal hunters, of course, have the keenest hearing, especially specifically the owls. So the feathers on this barred owl's facial discs are funneling sound into its ears. And a bird like a barn owl can catch a mouse in total darkness just by sound alone. Well, owls are so cool. We need to devote a slide just to them and all their special features. So we already talked about their zygodactyl feet with the 2 toes forward and 2 toes backwards to facilitate grabbing their prey. And their digestive technique of spitting up the pellets of undigestible matter. Then there's the 14 neck vertebrates, which allow them to rotate their heads up to 270 degrees because their eyes can't move in the sockets. So when they're trying to estimate distances, you'll see them kind of bobbing their head back and forth. If you look at the facial discs on this short-eared owl hunting over the grasslands in the upper right, all those feathers are funneling the sound into ear openings, which are asymmetrically located on the head in order to give the owl a better sound picture. The ears are actually offset so that the owl can triangulate sound to pinpoint the prey. Owl feathers are also different from other birds. The leading edges of the flight feathers are not smooth like other birds, but they're feathered or comb-like. This dampens the sound created by wind rushing over the wings in flight, making them silent flyers and deadly predators. So if you're standing in the yard and a little downy woodpecker flies past, you hear a big rush of air in the flapping of its wings. But a large owl could swoop in without you even noticing unless you happen to see it. Owls also have feathered legs and feet, unlike most birds. And owls are camouflage experts. If they close their eyes, they can practically disappear into a tree trunk, like this screech owl that we looked at before. This is necessary because they rest during the day, and if they're not blending in, you will know it because the blue jays, the chickadees, the crows, and any bird with a nest nearby will be mobbing it. Some owls, like this great horned owl in the lower right corner, have tufts. These are not ears. The tufts just help to break up their silhouette, kind of contributing to their camouflage. So owls come in all sizes too. The biggest being the snowy owl at around 4 pounds, and the saw-whet owl being the smallest at less than 3 ounces. So to give you an idea of how big a 3-ounce bird is, when they're banding birds, they put saw-whets in a little tomato paste can to hold them still. Sadly, the majority of owl deaths are caused by automobiles. So the best thing that you can do to help out owls is to not throw your apple core out the window on the highway. The chipmunk will come to eat the apple, the owl will be focused on the chipmunk, and the next car will hit the owl. All right, sound. Birds are unique in that they have a syrinx. Their windpipe splits into 2 bronchial tubes, and the bird creates sound using nearly all the air that passes over it. People, on the other hand, use about 2% of exhaled air to create sound with the larynx. And because there are 2 tubes, the bird can make 2 separate sounds at once. So a classic example is the wood thrush, which hopefully you can hear here. So birds use songs to attract mates and mark their territories. Thus, the dawn chorus in the summer, where after a night of relative silence, all the birds wake up and need to reestablish their breeding territories. So they all start singing at once until they get hungry and go look for breakfast. Birds also have many chip notes or call notes, which they use to communicate with each other, to let others know where they are, and to communicate the presence of predators. So one you might be quite familiar with is the chickadee-dee-dee sound. All right, smell. Most birds do not have much of a sense of smell. A songbird cannot detect a human scent and will not reject a nest if you pick it up and return it to the nest. Some seabirds like petrels, shearwaters, and albatross actually use smell to find food in the ocean. And this becomes a problem when the plastic trash in the ocean gets covered with algae. The birds think it's food and they end up eating the plastic. The king of smell, though, is the turkey vulture. So this bird can smell a rotting carcass from thousands of feet in the air. Their cousins, the black vultures, do not smell as well, so they soar above the turkey vultures and then follow them down to dinner. But being more aggressive, they steal some of the carcass, but they also protect it from other scavengers, so the TVs put up with them. Vultures have some other unique adaptations. They have a bad rap as being bringers of death, but in truth, they only eat dead things. And they have evolved to be super efficient sanitation engineers. Their digestive system can handle bubonic plague, anthrax, rabies, and just about any other evil microorganisms. It's so corrosive, it will dissolve lead bullets, which unfortunately leads to lead poisoning and is one of the biggest threats to vultures. So leave it to us to find a way to poison the unpoisonable. Vulture feet, unlike other raptors, have no sharp talons for killing or clutching their prey. They're just like chicken feet, made for walking and better balance. Their beaks, on the other hand, are very sharp, made for ripping apart carrion. So you can see it has the same kind of hook that the eagles and the hawks had. Their featherless heads are easier to keep clean when they're foraging in a rotting carcass. And they poop on their legs to kill bacteria and to keep cool. Their only form of defense when threatened is to vomit on their attacker, which is probably quite effective considering what they eat. Truly a unique set of adaptations. All right, as far as taste goes, birds have a poorly developed sense of taste, basically just enough to decide whether to swallow or not to swallow. They have anywhere from 50 to a few hundred taste buds, whereas people have about 10,000 or so. Touch is an important sense for flight. The changes in air temperature, pressure, and wind speed are transferred down the feathers to extensive nerves in the skin. So no feathers have nerve endings, but they transfer the touch to nerves in the skin. Many birds, like woodpeckers and the flycatchers, have a lot of those bristle feathers, which may give them more sensitivity around their bills. And some of the shorebirds that probe in the sand and mud actually have flexible tips on the ends of their bill, allowing them to feel around for their prey in the sand. And birds also have an additional sense that allows them to detect Earth's magnetic field. So this might be used for navigation, but it's not really well understood yet. And finally, there's bird brains and intelligence. So this is probably a topic for a whole other talk, but it's worth mentioning some interesting bird brain capabilities here, just to pique your interest. So corvids are the jays, crows, and ravens. They're believed to be some of the smartest birds, able to solve puzzles to get at food. You know, they know how to displace water with rocks to make something come up to the surface of a bucket, or they can use sticks for tools. Crows can remember human faces and actually pass that information along to their offspring. The bird banders discovered this in Washington, and they took to wearing Nixon masks so that the crows wouldn't dive bomb them when they were just out for a walk in the park after a banding incident. Some birds have incredible memories to remember where they cache thousands of seeds every winter, and every year they have to make a new mental map of their cache. I'm thinking if I had that kind of a bird brain, I would never misplace my car keys again. Jays are also known to watch other birds in order to steal their food. Knowing this, they can be very secretive about hiding their own. Sometimes they'll bury a nut and then dig it up and move it if they think another bird was watching them. Chickadees can tell a sunflower's value by its weight. House sparrows have learned to open the automatic doors at the garden center just by hovering under the sensors. And then they've also learned which aisle the bird seed's stored in. Yellow warblers can identify cowbird eggs. Cowbirds are parasitic nesters that lay their eggs in a smaller bird's nest and let the small bird raise their big chick, which will kick out their own nestlings. The yellow warblers can identify the eggs. They're too small to remove them, but they're smart enough to build a new nest on top and start over if they find a cowbird egg. Over in England, some of the blue tits and robins actually learned to remove the cardboard bottle caps from milk bottles to get at the cream on top. And this is amazing because their digestive systems also had to adapt to this new food source, since most birds are lactose intolerant. Pigeons even can distinguish people in photos and identify oak leaves from other leaves. So there are many examples. I would highly recommend Jennifer Ackerman's book called The Genius of Birds if you would like to learn more about bird intelligence. All right, well, hopefully you learned a little bit about bird adaptations and what makes a bird a bird. So I'll put up a list of resources that I used to create this talk. Feel free to do a screen capture if you want to research anything more on your own. And if you're interested in learning more about the Waterman Bird Club, visit our website at watermanbirdclub.org. And thank you for listening.